Today we lost an American icon as John Glenn, whose 1962 flight made him the first American to orbit the Earth, has died at the age of 95. Glenn died at the James Cancer Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, where he was hospitalized for more than a week, according to that hospital spokesman, Hank Wilson. I thought that was kind of weird, Hank Wilson being, that famous record by a famous singer who died also this year. But back to John Glenn. So Glenn was born on July 18th, 1921 in Cambridge, Ohio, and grew up in New Concord, Ohio with the nickname Bud. He joined the town band as a trumpeter at age 10 and accompanied his father one Memorial Day, an echoing version of Taps. In his 1999 memoir, Glenn wrote, "That feeling sums up my childhood. It formed my beliefs and my sense of responsibility. Everything that came after that just came naturally." So John Herschel Glenn Jr. was his his full name, and he had two major passions in life, flying and politics. So before he gained fame orbiting the world, he was a fighter pilot in 2 wars, and as a test pilot, he set a transcontinental speed record. So Glenn had originally wanted to be a commercial pilot, but that was all changed by World War II, and he felt his country calling. He left Muskingum College to join Naval Air Corps and soon after the Marines. He became a successful fighter pilot who ran 59 hazardous missions, often as a volunteer or as requested backup of assigned pilots. A war later in Korea, he earned the nickname MiG-Mad Marine because obviously he could take down a lot of Russian MiGs. So Glenn's public life began when he broke the transcontinental airspeed record, bursting from Los Angeles to New York City in only 3 hours, 23 minutes, and 8 seconds, with his Crusader aircraft averaging 725 miles per hour. And this is all the way back in 1957, so 725 miles an hour. That's still fast in today's standards by planes, and that was all the way back in 1957. And that really proved, that was kind of a test for jets, and that proved that jets could sustain these maximum speeds without pretty much blowing up for long distances. So that was a big, not only an accomplishment for him, but an accomplishment for engineering feats. But despite all those previous accomplishments, and just by any means, just that much would be quite an accomplishment for any human being. But to most Americans, John Glenn was most remembered as an astronaut. So in 1959, Glenn wrote in Life magazine, quote, "Space travel is at the frontier of my profession. It is going to be accomplished, and I want to be in on it. There's also an element of simple duty involved. I'm convinced I have something to give this project." It's something he had a lot, actually, to give to that project. Because back in the heat of the Cold War, the space race had begun. And the Soviet Union leaped ahead by putting Sputnik 1 satellite into orbit in 1957, and then launched the first man in space, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, in a 108-minute orbital flight on April 12, 1961. But America, you can't keep America down. We were catching up fast. So after 2 suborbital flights by Alan Shepard Jr. and Gus Grissom, who is one of my favorite astronauts, it was up to Glenn to be the first American to orbit the Earth. Godspeed, John Glenn, is what fellow astronaut Scott Carpenter radioed in just before Glenn took off the Cape Canaveral launch pad, which is now a National Historic Landmark. Glenn responded, "Roger, the clock is operating, we're underway." Always business. That was always Glenn. He's always a very, very business-minded man. He's very mission-minded. And then he started his 4-hour, 55-minute, and 23-second flight that took America to a place it had never been before. At the time of that February 20th, 1962 flight, Glenn was already 40 years old. He's, to get that mission, you figured he'd be a much younger man, but he was already, like I said, very accomplished even before that mission there that really rose him to national prominence. So during the flight, Glenn uttered a phrase that he would repeat frequently throughout life: 0G and I feel fine, meaning he's out of gravity, he's finally weightless. Glenn said he was often asked if he was afraid of that flight. He replied, "If you are talking about fear that overcomes what you are supposed to do, no. You've trained very hard for those flights." But Glenn's ride in the cramped Friendship 7 capsule had its scary moments, at least gauged by normal human beings. Sensors showed his heat shield was loose after 3 orbits, and Mission Control worried he might burn up during re-entry, in which temperatures reach over 3,000 degrees. But luckily, the heat shield held, as we know. But while this may have scared, like I said, a normal human, Glenn was nothing but extraordinary. After that flight, he received his second ticker tape parade. That's right, his second. And how come you just have one? Just have one is amazing. But he was his second ticker tape parade, with the first coming after he broke the transcontinental speed record. And that was in New York City. And his love of flight was lifelong. So last June, at a ceremony renaming the Columbus Airport for him, Glenn recalled employing his parents to take him to that airport to look at planes whenever they passed through the city. He said, "It was something I was fascinated with." And he piloted his own planes until age 90, so that's just amazing. It shows the kind of physical shape this man was in as well. But can you imagine that, going to that airport when he was a young child and eventually having that airport named after him? So he wasn't done with space, though, despite that. In fact, he went back into space in 1998 at the age of 77 aboard the space shuttle Discovery. He got to move around the shuttle for far longer, 9 days this time instead of just the 5 hours, as well as sleep and experiment with bubbles and weightlessness. It wasn't just it just wasn't a PR opportunity either. Of course, it was a PR opportunity for NASA, but it also gave NASA some insights into what older people do in space, how it affects their body. So he was able to still give back to NASA even at the age of 77. And in a news conference from space, Glenn said, "To look out at this kind of creation out here and not believe in God is to me impossible." And that's quite an amazing statement there. And maybe that's what these so-called scientists, as we call them, such as Stephen Hawking, need to understand. Because to see that beautiful, immense sight of God's creation has to be life-altering. Only so few men and women have been able to see that. So that's amazing. And I can just imagine what it's like. And most of us only can just imagine. So now to his political side of him. Like I said, his two things were flight and politics. And he first dipped his hands in politics in 1964 when he ran for Senate. And he actually ran for Senate after the advice of John F. Kennedy, who said he should run for public office. In fact, the NASA psychologist even told him that you would be very well suited for public life. And John F. Kennedy said you should run for office someday. And in 1964 he did so, but he had to leave the race when he suffered a concussion. But you can't keep a good man down, right? So he tried again in 1970, but was defeated in the primary by Howard Metzenbaum, who later lost the election to Robert Taft Jr. And that was the start of a really kind of complex relationship with Metzenbaum, who later joined him in the Senate. So like I said, can't keep him down. In 1974, Glenn again ran against Metzenbaum, and what turned out to be a bitter primary, and won the election. And he eventually made peace with Metzenbaum, who won election to the Senate in 1976. So I do go show you, talking about Mitt Romney, and a lot of people give him flack for saying things about Donald Trump and Nikki Haley. This right here is another example of two men who had a bitter race, really, running against each other, and then were able to make up later. So in 1980, Glenn set yet another record. However, this time it was a political one, as he won re-election with a whopping 1.6 million vote margin. That's quite a big margin for just one state. So during his time in the Senate, he became an expert on nuclear weaponry and was a leading supporter of the B-1 bomber when many in Congress doubted the need for it. And as chairman of the Government Affairs Committee, he turned a microscope on waste and fraud in the federal bureaucracy. Something we definitely need back again today. Now, Glenn said the lowest point in his life was 1990, when he and 4 other senators came under scrutiny for their connections to Charles Keating, the notorious financier who eventually served prison time for his role in the costly savings and loans failure of the 1980s. Now, the Senate and Ethics Committee cleared Glenn of any serious wrongdoing, but he said he exercised poor judgment. He said that was the lowest point in his life. But everybody should be allowed at least one mistake. And that episode was really the only brush with scandal in his long public career, and didn't do anything really to diminish his popularity in Ohio. You figure the guy's been in the spotlight as long as he has. That's the only thing he had. That's the only scandal he's had. That's not too bad. So in all, he served 24 years in the Senate, representing Ohio longer than any other senator in the state's history. He announced his impending retirement in 1997, 35 years to the day after he became the first American in orbit, saying, quote, "There is still no cure for the common birthday." So a man with a sense of humor as well. But now, after all that, as a very illustrious life, John Glenn has returned to the skies for the final time. And all I have to say is Godspeed, John Glenn. Godspeed. So